David, thanks for taking the time to speak about your latest report and the first report of the Strategic Policing and Law Enforcement Program. The report's title is The Commonwealth's Fight Against Organised Crime. It's worth doing more. Why should the Commonwealth do more in the fight against organised crime?
Yeah, look, that's a really good question, because a lot of the fight against organised crime is actually the responsibility of the state governments. However, the Commonwealth Government also puts about $3 billion a year, at least, into its law enforcement efforts. Why should it do more? Particularly, I think it should do more for a couple of reasons. First one is that organised crime is becoming more prevalent. It's becoming a larger problem. And unless we start doing more about it now, it has the potential to become an even greater problem in the future, and that could have big economic and social consequences. I think it's also worth doing more because the Australian jurisdictions are all playing their own individual role and they are cooperating, but they could cooperate even closer. And I think Commonwealth intervention or Commonwealth assistance would help them to work even closer together.
Sure. David, your paper analyses the Anti-Gang Squad initiative by the Commonwealth. Will these squads make a difference?
Look, I really think they will, Luke, and they'll make a difference because they're integrating a lot of information that's being held at the Commonwealth level in areas like immigration, social security, tax, customs and law enforcement. And they're giving the information needed back to the state governments so that they can prosecute criminals, or they can investigate criminals, I should say, on a whole bunch of different levels. So that's really an exciting initiative, and it will work if it's implemented well. And to implement it well, I think the Commonwealth has got to be sure that it remembers that the state governments are in the lead in these areas in most of the situations. And also too, if the Commonwealth is happy to take a bit of a back seat when it comes to claiming credit for what is achieved in the fight against organised crime. All in all, I'm quite optimistic, and I think we will see as the squads, strike forces as they're known, are rolled out over the next few months, that we'll start to see some reasonable arrests or reasonable levels of arrests made because that information has been integrated so well.
Now, your paper also speaks about capability development. Why is capability development important in this fight against organised crime?
I want to go back to how we managed terrorism in the early 2000s, and one of the key initiatives, aside from legislation, was to ensure that all the jurisdictions had a reasonable level of capability to deal with terrorism. And by capability I meant they have the potential to do something about it. What gives them that potential is when they integrate their people, their training, their equipment, their legislation into one, and also their information, importantly, into a package that is coherent and also useful. I think in the organised crime space this is missing at the moment. I think at the moment jurisdictions have a very uneven level of capability to deal with organised crime, and if the Commonwealth was to play an integrating role and also to seed the effort with a bit of extra funding, then we could potentially lift the nationwide level of ability to deal with organised crime. And I think that's important because of the ability of organised crime to move across borders fairly easily.
Sure. The paper is The Commonwealth's Fight Against Organised Crime, worth doing more. David, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Luke.